Hi everyone. It's lovely to be here. Thank you so much for the kind invitation. Can you hear me okay, firstly? Yeah, awesome. I'm just going to share my screen. You see that?
Perfect. Clearly better than me.
No, that's absolutely fine. Cool. Yeah, I just want to give a bit of background, and I want to welcome a good friend of mine, but also a partner and collaborator with us, Michael Bell, who's the founder of Acorn Compliance. But firstly, I'm Michael. I'm a doctor by background. I'm a A&E NHS doctor and a sports medic. But my day job is running an organization called Bloom. We build solutions with the NHS primarily, but we also build with industry, third sector, universities, and we regulate them and then sell them internationally. And actually, one of the solutions that we're working on together is with Michael Bell. Michael's a specialist in this game, so whilst I come at this from a product and a clinical perspective, Michael is an expert regulator. Michael, did you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much, Michael. So, Michael Bell, partner at Acorn Compliance. I'm a regulatory advisor for companies, innovators who have SaMD and AIaMD. I've worked in this kind of business for 25 years now, helping companies of all shapes and sizes to become compliant and regulated. So, it's great to be here. Thank you for the invite, and I'm looking forward to talking to you more.
So Michael and I will bounce between slides so let me just put do not disturb on because otherwise it will be popping off every 2 seconds. We will be sharing a number of slides between us, but also what I want to do is finish in good time and have a bit of a Q&A sort of diagnostic session because I think having been innovative myself. Oh. Having been innovators ourselves, there's nothing better than actually being able to get some ad hoc advice. And of course, at the end of this, we're happy to share these slides. We're happy to answer any other questions. And perhaps, Katia, we can create a bit of a FAQ of all the questions asked. If not today, because sometimes people don't like to ask these sort of questions. There's no wrong or right here. The idea is that we're going to demystify a lot of regulation, which I know a lot of people find quite overwhelming and quite daunting. So hopefully by the end of this, you'll have a good foundational understanding of what it takes. And then if we've got any intricacies, we can answer them in the Q&A diagnostic session, which we'll try and leave a good sort of 20 minutes for. We've got an hour, so we'll try and talk through this as fast as we can. I'm going to hand over to Michael B shortly, but what are we here to do today? The idea is to be able to understand the clinical evaluation process. Obviously, I'm going to be coming at this from a clinician perspective, and then Michael from a regulator perspective, and the two are very important and very similar in many ways, of course, but also have their sort of intricate sort of elements too. We're specifically going to be looking at medical devices here. So I guess the caveat is that all software as a service that is supporting clinical workflow, particularly in the NHS, will require some level of regulation. But what we're specifically focused on today is medical devices. And medical devices are effectively anything that can influence the course of disease. So it can be anything from a tongue depressor to gloves to software that helps with decision making, all the way up to AI that is sort of autonomous. Considerations around what clinical evaluation actually means, and this is a constantly changing landscape, right? So we're going to be setting out both the here and now, but also what the future might look like as well. And then a bit about beyond the borders of the UK, what else do we need to know? And where are the similarities and where are the differences, perhaps more importantly. Michael, over to you.
Thanks so much, Michael. So it's great to be here. I'm going to be talking today, as Michael said there, about clinical evaluation, which really is the heartbeat of a technical file, right? So as you're creating your medical device and you're thinking about studies and so on, and creating the documentation that's required in the evidence, really for me, the clinical evaluation plan, particularly in a clinical evaluation report, are one of the most looked at things from regulators and auditors. So the process itself involves like a planning of a thorough analysis and assessment of the data you believe is going to be required to actually prove the safety and efficacy of the device. Okay, as I said, it's the heartbeat, the foundation, really cornerstone of the technical file. So it's really important. Why is it important to do this, right? Well, it's important because you need to prove the safety and efficacy of the device. It's important because it's one of the main things that regulators are going to look at, they're going to query. And having a well-rounded and robust clinical evaluation plan and report means you're going to get to market quicker, because otherwise you end up in this structured dialogue which goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, where a lot of the time innovators are asked for more detail and more information to prove the safety and efficacy of the device. So getting this right and doing it early, crucially, doing it from the start of your kind of planning, like making sure it's central to that, will help you a lot in the long run. Okay, and of course, it's also important that you get this right for healthcare providers. So certainly in my own experience, a lot of buyers of medical devices, they don't just take it as gospel that, hey, you've been audited, you've got the certification, your MDR, class 2A, class 2B, whatever it is, certified. Well, as a buyer, what I'd want to look at as well would be, I'd want to evaluate the plan myself, not the full evaluation, but look at it, understand what was covered in that, because I might have, as a buyer, some nuances with my own environment, with my own teams, with my own kind of infrastructure. That means that I need to evaluate the plan to make sure your device can be appropriately used within my own locale. So it's actually a document which gets looked at not just by auditors, but also by buyers of technology and medical devices too. So I wanted to make that clear. And obviously, when you're thinking of developing the clinical evaluation plan, I think it's important that you consider those different audiences. Could you go to the next slide, please, Michael? Thank you.
Just before Michael carries on, I just wanted to amplify what Michael just said there around buyers are becoming a lot more savvy when it comes to clinical evidence, aren't they, Michael? They're almost hiring, well, they're not almost, they are hiring individuals specifically focused on clinical evidence. So these will typically be either what we call clinical safety officers, or they'll be experts in medical devices, or they'll bring someone in fractionally like Michael to look at it from a buyer's perspective as well. So they are becoming a lot more aware of what we mean by clinical evidence in the eyes of a regulator, and they will be looking out for evidence of proof that you are a safe solution to be used in industry and in healthcare specifically. By definition, obviously, we see prevention of harm to patients and staff as a consequence of the technology. It's important to highlight that safety and clinical evidence isn't just about the actual model itself in the element of AI. It's actually when you take that from a proof of concept or a living lab environment and you put it into the real world, there may be additional risks that surface as a consequence of bringing it into the context of that patient or that hospital or that lab or that primary care provider. So the key point here is that clinical evidence and clinical safety is not a static process. There's been a lot of change around the post-market surveillance, which is what happens after you get medical device status, because we recognize that things are changing so quickly all the time with products, especially AI that is constantly evolving, constantly learning, hopefully becoming more accurate as it does. But the complexity around this is that, for a lot of this, you are both having to set the standards of your product, prove that you're meeting that standard, and then once you've gone live, continue to meet such standards as well. So just wanted to talk about that from a clinical safety perspective. And if you are an innovator, if you are a supplier, you probably should have, or you definitely should have, a clinical safety officer on your side of the table. It might be a medical director, it might be a fractional CSO, but someone that can really vouch for your safety on your side of the table, and that will provide a lot of reassurance to the buyer. Back to you, Michael.
Thanks, Michael. So basically, we went through some reasons there, great reasons why clinical evaluation plan and report is important. Obviously, to manage, as I've said before, it's the heart really of the technical file. It's basically is there to prove. We're going to go through the anatomy of a clinical evaluation plan in a moment, but it's there really to prove the safety and effectiveness of your device. And it's a pre-market activity, right? So you need to be doing this, getting it ready, and making sure it's robust enough. Whatever data that's going to contain, which we'll come more into in a moment, prior to getting into market. Okay. And it's obviously the evaluators and the auditors are going to be looking at that information and evaluating whether what you've defined as your approach to clinical evaluation and the results therefore you have are sufficient to allow you to kind of move into market approval. I don't know if you can skip to that slide, please, Michael, with the anatomy of a clinical
Yeah.
evaluation plan, so we can dive deeper into that. Thank you.
Let me find it. Bear with me 1 second. This is show business.
No problem.
Full screen. Oh, 1 sec. Why is that not coming up as full screen? Here we go. Apologies for this, guys. That's the one, isn't it?
That's the one. Thanks, Michael. Cheers. So one of the most common questions we get asked is, okay, clinical evaluation plan, like what is that? What do we need to put in there? What depths and level do we need to go to actually pass an audit? Well, the answer to that last question is it depends, right? It depends on the risk classification of your device. So one of the first things you'll have done is looked at the regulation, depending on your target markets, right? Set your intended purpose and use, and define which classification the actual device is going to be sitting within. And so the level of evidence you need to acquire in the plan you need to set out is going to be proportionate to that risk classification and other specific elements of your intended purpose statement. So certainly think about EU medical device regulations in the UK, CE mark and what's required with that. General safety and performance requirements, or GSPR, is one of the key things. And these are really a list of safety and performance requirements that are required, you required some evidence against to prove your device is safe to use. And there's many of them, okay? So producing a clinical evaluation plan is one part of that. And it talks about different components of the device, and you've got to then say, okay, for this component of the device, how am I proving the safety case for that, and so on and so on. So intended purpose links to this, of course, and of course, what that's going to set out is what the device is going to achieve and what are the clinical claims. So what's the device going to achieve? Well, is it going to improve outcomes to level X for cohort Y, for demographic Y over time? What is the claims you're making there? Because it's those claims that the actual clinical evaluation plan must answer appropriately and sufficiently, and it's in the report that you'll ultimately deliver that will have the evidence in to underpin that. So it's really important in the plan to set out to just reflect on the intended purpose, to re-identify and express the target groups, the age, the gender, if it's a particular disease type, what's the severity of the disease, or even what specialities of clinician, if it's a clinically facing piece of software, AI, what is the kind of persona, if you like, of the clinicians who are going to use this, and what are the benefits that they're going to draw from using the medical device. So also what we need to do is obviously set out the clinical benefits too. Benefits are so important. So if we think of what Michael was mentioning, clinical safety, there's a number of ways to look at that. So there's another standard called ISO 14971, which is clinical risk assessment for medical devices. Now, the target with that, the goal is to prove that any risks that you've identified, which could bring patient harm through usage of the device, are outweighed by the benefit. And so there's a key focus on this in the plan too, to just set out those particular benefits, to draw upon the evidence you've got from the 14971 process. And then what you're going to need to do is collect data and evidence and evaluation, which proves beyond doubt that the benefits outweigh the risk. What we also need to do is obviously express our data collection methods. Now, this can be done in a number of ways, right? So the typical way is studies, and the kind of studies you're going to need to undertake again will be proportionate to the kind of the classification of the device and the intention of the device. So studies can range in cost, and it's obviously going to be one of the most costly pieces of work you maybe do. They can range maybe from a very small study, somewhere up to 50K, to huge studies which can cost anything really. Benchmark that's probably $500,000. So it's going to depend again on the actual intention of the device, the benefits and the risk approach. There's the kind of the volume of study you need to do. And of course, if you're doing studies, you're going to need to gain ethics committee approval if the studies are on humans too. Other things that go into your plan. So if we're planning this out, we're going to say, hey, we're going to do study X. This is intended purpose. These are the target groups of use. This is the studies we're going to do. These are the cohorts. These are the numbers. This is how we're going to carry it out. Also, what you can do to supplement that is something called a state-of-the-art review or equivalence check. That's about looking at other devices which are already on the market, which maybe have a similar nature to yours, a similar intended use, similar sizes of audience, similar clinical claims. There's different databases that exist where you can kind of drill them and determine all the other devices out there like mine. If so, what's their safety record? Is the published information on their safety that I can draw upon to prove that my device is actually safe to use as well? Now, as you go up the risk classifications, using state-of-the-art reviews or using equivalence checks becomes less and less valuable, because there's an audit there working for a notified body or an approved body. If it's a high-risk device, they're not really too keen on state-of-the-art equivalence checks. They want unique studies and unique data of them now that are helping to prove that device is safe to use. So planning studies, doing this work is really key, and you need to outline that in your clinical evaluation plan. Risk benefits analysis, that comes mainly from your 14971 work, your clinical risk assessment. So again, you're going to outline that here, and you're also going to not just say what's the outputs of that assessment, but also how you're going to, as Michael said, continue that process of risk identification through the lifetime of the device. And that really links to the next point on post-market clinical follow-up. And of course, there were some new rules brought into the UK recently on this. But PMCF is really, really important, because as a team, as an innovator, putting a medical device out there, it's great to know how it was at the start of its lifetime. But of course, we're looking at the whole life cycle here. We need to know, we need to evaluate and monitor the safety and performance of the device as it goes through its life cycle. So that's a key activity. And you would form all of this. This is effectively the kind of center of your plan. And of course, the plan would then becomes real. So you then go on to enact the studies, you go on to do the research, and the outputs of that go into what's called the clinical evaluation report.
I just want to add a few pieces here, because obviously hearing it from a regulatory expert, it all sounds quite daunting, and you're probably thinking, oh my God, where do I start? But one of the key elements to a successful medical device registration and almost an evolution is the product evolution, right? At Bloom, we always think about what is that minimally viable capability that we want to offer to the patient, the workforce, and the service within that healthcare or life science organization, because typically your product can go, or your service can go on an evolutionary journey to go from something that is a low risk medical device all the way up to the class 3, because ultimately the higher the class, as Michael's highlighted, the higher the class, the more evidence you're going to need to provide. Chances are the less state of the art availability there is anyway, because you're really breaking down a barrier to doing things a new and a novel way. So there's probably less people that have done it your way if you're a class 3 in comparison to a class 1, and that's just because of the barriers to what it takes to become a class 3. So a really nice example that we often use is, let's say you are a vital signs monitoring organization in intensive care units, so one of the highest risk areas of a hospital. You've got the sickest patients. If your solution just allows for the transfer of vital signs data to a computer within a nursing station, relatively low risk, right? Because you're not actually reading those vital signs. You're just transferring that data to a place where it's more convenient for that healthcare professional to see it. So it's a relatively low risk medical device because it's data transfer. You're not actually manipulating the data in any way. But then if you go on to actually read that data and highlight the alerts, so things that look abnormal and that someone might need to pay attention to, you're now starting to increase the risk, because you're now basically saying some of that clinical thinking that those healthcare professionals sat in that nursing station are going to be doing, we're going to be doing, or our product's going to be doing. So now you're starting to take on an element of more risk, and you're basically saying, trust us to let you know when something's going wrong. We had a really interesting project come over my desk about a year ago, where they wanted to build a platform that said, it was an intensive care unit, and I still use this, a reason I use this example. They basically wanted to build a solution, a device, a medical device, or AI as a medical device more specifically, that allowed for a screen that just said cardio, cardiovascular system, okay. Respiratory system, okay. So they basically wanted to say, we're not going to show you any numbers. We're just going to let you know when things aren't okay. And that was a step too far for a lot of the ITU staff, as you can imagine. They sometimes like the reassurance of seeing the numbers still. Yes, it'd be lovely if there was something as accurate as being able to say everything about this patient is okay until it's not okay. But there's 2 points to this. There's one, thinking about your product evolution, but then there's another part about finding gaps in markets. What Michael is speaking about is finding gaps in markets that mean that you can bring an innovative solution to market. But there's also understanding whether there's a market in the gap. And what I mean by that is, are the staff ready to trust your system, or are the patients ready to trust your system? Because you're going to spend a lot of time, effort, probably resources and money on getting your medical device status. You're going to want to know for sure that on the other side of that, the market is actually ready for it. Because if it's extremely disruptive, if it is your class twos and your threes, it's going to be phenomenal. It's going to solve all manner of problems, I hope. But actually, what it does come down to is trust and cultural change. So there is so much more that meets the eye than just being able to evidence that your product is safe. You've also got to win over the people that are going to be using it. So I really wanted to, from a manufacturer's perspective, a lot of this can feel daunting, but if you do take the right approach to your product development and your product evolution, you can start to gather some of this trust, you can gather some of this data, you can gather some of this reassurance, and that can feed into your subsequent clinical evaluation plans as your product evolves and as it takes on more risk. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Michael. So yeah, clinical data collection, as I mentioned, it's just kind of absolutely core to doing this. Usually there's always a study, right? And it can be difficult to tell, and there's a question in there now about kind of the level of evidence required and to actually support an audit submission for your medical device. So as I mentioned, it's proportionate, right? And I think it comes really from experience in terms of kind of being involved in clinical evaluations and understanding and reviewing evidence from many devices. It really comes down to experience of what's sufficient. The regulations are great at saying what you need, but if you read them, they don't really say, say, hey, you need a study to prove the performance, but they're not going to go into the depth of how you carry out that study in too much detail. Okay, there are some key parts to mention, but it doesn't give you everything you need. So I think it comes down to really experience and understanding what's going to be proportionate and kind of experience, particularly of working with auditing bodies like BSI and so on, ones in Europe or the US, to make sure you have sufficient data there. And as I mentioned, it's a very costly part of the journey. So this is why it's really important to plan ahead with this. And certainly if you bring in a new device to the market and you're seeking investment, this part is something that should be taken very seriously, because it could be the make or break between actually getting your device to market or not, of course. So it's really worthwhile getting some advice on this, looking at the requirements of your product, looking at the intended use, and working out with the regulatory expert or someone that's done this before, that, what's the level of evidence I'm likely to need here. As I say, it could hamper your time to market otherwise. So be prepared, because it can be very costly. And of course, I know there's a question there too around MHRA approval for like ethics approval for studies, and that is a core component of the journey really that you're going to need to go through. So data collection is key, and what's really important with data collection is planning for it, right? Really understanding who you're going to speak to, what's the question set you're going to ask, what's the data you're looking for, what does good look like? So what does good look like in a situation to make sure you can prove your device is safe to use? That's really, really key. Looking at the sources too, making sure that the sources are like credible. So with direct studies, of course, they should be credible, but be really clear and sure on who is part of that study. What do they absolutely fit the demographic that I'm looking to prove the safety of the device to? Because I've seen that fall down a number of times too, where the cohorts that were used in studies weren't quite enough or weren't quite positively correct to prove in an audit that the device was safe to use. So it's really important to manufacture and get that study right, the cohort right for that study too. And of course, with the support and device claims, as we've mentioned a couple of times now, and there is some database out which we can send you as an FAQ, kind of as a follow-up to this session, to help you understand what's out there and what you can look at and the level of detail you can acquire on equivalent devices. But it's important again as well that you've looked at the right devices, that the devices have the same or very close clinical claims to your device, because that's again going to help with an audit situation in order to understand what you've collected, why you've chosen those devices, why you've chosen that cohort, and that's very important, obviously, to prove the safety and efficacy of the device. Next slide, please, Michael. Thank you.
Oops, no, is that the right one? No.
Trying to think, it is the analysis and assessment slide. Next one.
That one.
That's the one. Thank you so much. So yeah, so what happens with the data when you get it though? So it's all well and good planning the study and getting that done, but there's a lot of oversight you'll need to give the study too, right? You can't just take it. You've got to really see it through. You've got to be part of the study almost yourself, and really, when the data is being collected, making sure that the product's being used in the correct way in the study, making sure it's being used like on plan, that it's being used as it's intended. That's really important, and checking all the way as you go that the cohort is as you expect it to be. So data collection is really, really crucial. Getting that right, but you must oversee it too, right? And what I would recommend is when the data starts rolling in, that you look at it, you look to validate it, okay? So you look to just assess it and you look to compare it against your device and look to see whether there's any actual gaps being promoted there. Is it showing you anything, even at an early stage, which might mean that your trial has to change somewhat or be tilted somewhat or pivoted to make sure you can prove the safety and efficacy of the device. So it does require a lot of rigor and a lot of time to oversee that as you go. So other things I wanted to mention here were really around SaMD and AIaMD. So particularly with the eye as a medical device, the data you're probably going to collect there. So with AI, right, if you've got a black box AI, it's very difficult to understand maybe what it's doing. If you're assessing and evaluating an AI product for safety and efficacy, you really need to be running usually significant volumes of testing. You need to be very clear in terms of how you report out what the AI is doing. So an auditor can also understand what's happening there. That's something called interpretability. They need to understand the process that's been followed by the AI as far as possible so they can look at the data that's coming out of it and the clinical evidence that's there and make sure that all matches up. That's really, really important too. So that's one of the considerations of AIaMD, and I think Michael had some more points to make on that.
I do. I'm trying to find where I put it. Here it is. Yeah, I think one of the challenges with AI as a medical device is that you set your own standards. It's a really strange experience because you've almost got to say, well, this solution to go into the market needs to be X% accurate. You've almost got to then be able to evidence why you're saying it's, let's say 80% accuracy is fit for the market. You've got to evidence why it doesn't need to be 85, it can't be 70 or 60%. So you're in a bit of a dance with the MHRA because you're almost setting yourself at standard, demonstrating how you can meet those standards, and then demonstrating how you're going to continue to meet those standards once you continue to engage with the market. So there's a really nice process that you can go through, which is that sort of state-of-the-art review, systematic review of literature, and just generally understanding what the baseline is. I think understanding what the baseline current process looks like cannot be understated, because if you are doing something that is completely novel, it's very different to enhancing something that already exists, right? Taking a digital solution and automating it is very different to having no solution and going straight to automation. And this again comes back to that product evolution that I mentioned before. It's always important to evidence any clinical experience that you've got. So again, having experts in the group and having experts invest their energy into the solution or the innovation is going to be really important. And then setting out that investigation process. Looking at the suitability, looking at the contribution, and looking at the how you're demonstrating performance is going to be really critical. And then providing analysis against that is the stage of actually making the conclusions that you are about why you're defining it as safe for the industry, and then demonstrating that it's sufficiently safe, and then obviously post-market clinical data capture, which Michael has already outlined. So, and the important part here is that this is a cycle, right? So you're almost going through this cycle continuously, monitoring your solution, which is why it can often require dedicated resource. It can be rather expensive, and I'm sure the question of how much it will cost will come to you, Michael. So watch out for that one, because I think it is a bit of a shoestring question. But I think that kind of resource planning, both financially and human resource planning, is super critical. I'll pass back to you. I think we skipped back. It's this one, is it?
Yeah, so I think, so the clinical evaluation report is obviously, so you start with the plan. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. These are the areas we're going to look at. This is the level of evidence we're going to look to acquire through our actual studies, through our state-of-the-art equivalents, and so on and so on. And then ultimately, the clinical evaluation report is another key artifact, as I'm sure you know, of the technical file. And that's where your results go, right? It's where your results go. So it's where all the findings go. And it's really important with these clinical evaluation reports that everything's, it's simple to say, but crystal clear. You've got to be referencing specific aspects of the device, explicitly stating what was tested, link that back to the GSPR requirement you're looking to meet, make it really clear in tables and what other way you can, and then present the evidence. Okay, so the structure of the clinical evaluation report is absolutely key to help an auditor smoothly move through that process and evaluate things. And of course, there is a structured dialogue through this time now in the UK, particularly, with an auditing body that you've chosen. But it's best to make it really clear, because that's going to certainly improve time to market. And also within the clinical evaluation report should be what work you've done, not just what the data is, but your assessment of that data too. Your validation of the findings and your proof that it does tie back to the aspects you were wishing to evaluate too. So it needs that oversight, that assessment, that write-up. And this is a really crucial part of the entire medical device piece. And of course, if AI is in the mix too, you can have specific data you're going to need to link out to there. You're going to want to talk about the interpretability of that information, adding in information around the AI itself. What process, what algorithms is it following? What models was it trained on? Whether they're your models or models from external use. Maybe you've kind of extended a model that already existed to make it more efficient, or to drive a new delivery of kind of compliance with an unmet need. So the report is really critical, and the more detail in here, the better. Certainly, the more structure it has, the clearer it is. It's only obvious, but it's only going to help the auditor. So I've seen some great clinical evaluation reports, and obviously we've stepped in as a company to correct clinical evaluation reports where they've been queried by audits too. So yeah, certainly can give more information on that if anyone's interested, kind of after today's session. But it's really important that you get that piece right, make it clear. And the gaps part of it really is, okay, you should be saying as well, what were the gaps? Even though we've got all this data, we've shown everything we can here to prove the safety and efficacy of the device. Maybe we still have concerns over areas X, Y, and Z. Maybe we couldn't quite get there with 100% of data. It's worthwhile pointing out where there was gaps or anomalies in the data you collected too. That's really, really important. That can obviously help go back in your product development cycle to look to close those gaps. So it's important to be completely transparent, obviously, and just set everything out in a very well structured way. And of course, some things which you cannot identify or can't conclude in the moment with the report can become part of your post-market clinical follow-up too. Your evaluation of the product through its life cycle can also be, you can filter some of the gaps into there where it's appropriate to do so. If there's giant gaps, of course, it's not possible. But if there's some things where there's just maybe a bit more needed, that can certainly become part of your PMCF process. Thanks, Michael. And so this is one of the key things auditors look for, so we wanted to put this in here. It's always going to boil down to risk versus benefit. And we mentioned just briefly before the ISO 14971 process, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, clinical risk assessment for medical devices, which asks you to take a specific approach to evaluate the risk of the product and to determine where patient harm could come through usage of the product. And with MDR, which is a bit different to NHS DTAC DCB 0129, we've just got to prove that the level of benefit outweighs the level of risk, okay? And this is also an ongoing endeavor. So as your product iterates, you need to continue to do clinical risk assessment, and you need to continue to report that out and make it part of your extended and evolving technical file as well. So with regards to high-risk devices, obviously, the higher you go up those classifications, the more evidence you're going to typically need, the more scrutiny will be applied by auditors on your evidence stack. So again, the way to mitigate it is through transparency, is through doing all your due diligence to look at everything from doing trials to state-of-the-art equivalence checks and just making sure you can really stand behind that evidence and it's defensible. And of course, the regulatory bodies themselves, it's slightly different in the EU to the UK right now, but they are obviously we're having some new regulations which are coming into play in the UK very soon now, which are probably going to just align us really to the EU. So just wanted to point out there are a few differences right now. But if I was developing an innovation, I would look to the EU regs because they're more strict at this moment in time than the UK ones, and therefore by following those and accounting for the nuances in the UK ones, that's probably going to be your best bet to moving forward.
Yeah, I definitely know that a lot of our builds that we're doing at Bloom at the moment, our clients are coming to us saying, you know, we want to align to UK standards because that's easier, faster, cheaper. But actually, you know, we're saying that we need to be looking at the bigger picture because for two reasons. One, the regulatory landscape is changing here in the UK, which Michael has outlined, but also as well, by focusing on the UK, you restrict yourself to the UK from a sales perspective. And so there are lots of benefits to being able to explore the wider sort of CE marking, FDA marking, lots of other countries globally align themselves to FDA standards or CE standards versus the rather sort of focused UKCA standards. So there are multiple benefits to really looking beyond the borders of UK medical device regulation at the moment. But you know, either seek that advice from whoever it is that's taking you on that journey or advising you.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Michael. So the CE marking, obviously, as you probably know already, is recognised, Michael said, in a number of countries around the world. And there's also something called the Single Audit Medical Device Program, which allows you to actually create a QMS too, which is kind of then valid and meets the requirements of different countries too. So there's ways part of your commercial strategy, I think, really links to this in terms of what markets am I going for, and planning is really key because that means you're going to save money, save time, and not block your routes to market as well. So we've mentioned probably already a number of the kind of specific considerations for AI as a medical device. Well, transparency, as you said, is absolutely key. If I'm an auditor coming in and you have a black box AI model, there's no way I can evaluate that. I'm not going to be able to understand how it's generating its outcomes or data or whatever it is. I need some transparency around that. I need to understand a bit more about the model or models you've used to train the AI. I'm going to need to know about what its process is internally to determine things. You know, does it, you know, how is it working? What is its pathway? What is it looking at? What is it reviewing? That needs to be really clear to me. And I'm also going to be correlating that in order against your technical specification. I'm going to be looking at the QMS. I'm going to be trying to draw from multiple sources as I evaluate the AI to make sure everything stacks up, to make sure I can understand it, because I can't sign this off as an auditor unless I can see the full picture, and I'm going to trace that full picture back to other parts of the technical file outside of clinical evaluation too. We mentioned basically interpretability as well. So interpretability is what I'm talking about there. It's about being able to comprehend how the decisions of the AI are being made and how that contributes towards safety. So it's about just setting out the documentation in a very straightforward way with diagrams and so on, which can be very, very helpful, of course. And of course, with AI in particular, ongoing validation is key because I can throw the same query to AI 100 times. I might get 99 different answers, right? So it depends on the kind of maturity of the model, how that model is being developed. AI must undergo continuous validation. So as an auditor, I'm going to be looking at what your plan is for that as well. What's your plan for continuous and ongoing validation of the AI? What's your roadmap for that too? But I want to be drawn on all those sources to give me the confidence that this product is actually safe, not just now as it goes to market, but also as it moves through its life cycle too. As I mentioned at the bottom there, all of this is underpinned by clear systematic design and development processes, which are going to be part of like IEC 62304, the 13485 stack, as well as other parts of your technical file.
There's another element to this because not only does this underpin clinical safety, but it also has a big health inequality element as well. So the example here is, let's say you've built a mobile app that uses a phone camera to, well, AI within a phone to be able to assess a mole for malignant melanoma. If you've trained that model on 99% of Caucasian skin, then chances are it's not going to be as accurate when assessing moles on black and brown skin. And so that creates clinical risk, but it also creates health inequality. So you really do need to think about the data that you're using to train these models, because it will be looked at. We're building a diabetic retinopathy solution with a university, and we know that certain ethnicities have hypopigmented retinas. And so we need to demonstrate that we've included enough of those hypopigmented retinas in our studies and in our training model training to be able to evidence that actually when the model is doing an assessment, it's doing an assessment across a whole range of backgrounds, a whole range of retinas, to be able to take into account that variation that you would see across a whole population, not a specific population. At this point, I just wanted to touch on the opportunities, because I think the good news is that there is a big focus on AI as a medical device, or AI more generally within healthcare. There is funding available for this, not just in the UK, but there is lots of funding available across Europe as well. Horizon Europe is a big multi-country fund that is focused on AI research and development, which means that whenever you're going for grants, whenever you're going for non-dilutive funding, whenever you're looking for support from even RADIANT-CERSI are offering lots of different variations of support at the moment. And it's all to give you the best chance of getting your solution to market. That's what they ultimately want you to do. That's what the MHRA wants you to do. They want you to get this solution to market, but they're the gatekeepers to safety. So as much as it feels like they're there to stop you, it's for good reason, and it's to make sure that those that do get to market are the best. So do take advantage of the various funding pots that are available. In the UK, the core 3 pots available are Innovate UK, SBRI, and NIHR. They're the 3 sort of government taxpayer-funded grants that are available. And AI is always coming up time and time again, and so too is regulatory support. So have regulation as a work package within your grant application. Make sure it's adequately funded. Make sure you've sought advice of just how much funding you're going to require for that. And the grant funders like it, because they like to know that you're actually taking that part seriously, because it is important and can often be left out, because all of that energy and funding goes into product development, which is just one string to your bow. Back to you,
Thanks, Michael. So we've put a bit in here about this new ISO standard that's going to be developed too. It's under development now, of course, and ISO standards need to go through a specific process before they can go live. So this one's nearing completion, as our understanding, and is expected late 2025. So 18969 really is around providing very clear guidelines on clinical evaluation itself, and particularly it has references in it, we believe, to software as a medical device and AI as a medical device, which is very, very welcome, because a lot of the current regulations, remember, were put in place a long time ago, certainly in the UK, and it was at a time when there was a lot far less software as a medical device around. So it's taken some time to kind of have some specifics around how clinical evaluation should happen for software as a medical device and AI as a medical device. This is what we expect to come in with 18969, and hopefully it's going to provide a harmonized standard for clinical evaluation. Because if you look around the globe now, there's many different standards in many different countries for evaluating clinical safety and efficacy of devices. So we're hoping that 18969 is one to watch, and that's going to assist somewhat, certainly with SaMD and AIaMD, and it's going to harmonize things. So we don't know much more about it than that, so we just wanted to put it in there as a placeholder. I don't know if Michael has anything else to say on that one.
Yeah, we do have some friends and colleagues that are actually on the advisory board for this ISO standard, and what that effectively means is that, for now, we are almost sort of kind of assuming that we know what is required from the standards agencies and the auditing bodies. So ISO standards, whilst they're not the most enjoyable reads, actually help a lot, because it means that it's really clear what is required of you. So can mean that the process is a lot more sort of time and material cost efficient, because as soon as you hit those standards, then you can say that you're compliant, and that will help with less of this kind of grey area approach that we've often seen many innovators go through at the moment, because they're not quite sure which class they are, whether or not they've got enough evidence, like you say, whether or not the percentage accuracy is the right balance. So I'm hoping that this will help us innovators save some time and money, because it will just make everything a lot clearer.
Yeah, I do hope so, Michael. So ISO standards are great. They often tell you what to do, right? But they don't. Some of them do miss out kind of exactly how to do that, and it's a bit open to interpretation. So I want to mention another one now, because obviously, if we're talking about clinical evaluation in the EU, there's another ISO standard which was released only a couple of years ago, called 42001. It's the EU. It links the EU AI Act in a way. It's basically a set of criteria to perform a risk assessment of an AI product, and whether that's a medical device or not. But in my experience, it's been used a lot now in the medical device domain to prove that a thorough risk assessment of the AI is being executed. And it does look at things like bias, model training, that sort of thing. It gives you kind of a prescription really to enact a risk assessment of AI, whether it's a medical device or not. So I think, given we're looking at the EU here on a slide, it's one to look at, and certainly it helps you if you were marketing to the EU, where you would need to meet the criteria of the EU AI Act. Well, if you've followed 42001 and done that correctly and been certified in it, then you've pretty much proved you're in line with the EU AI Act, and it'll go a long way as well to support an audit of your medical device too. So other things about the EU obviously uses a decentralized model for evaluation and audit, or an approval, sorry, of your medical device, which is a bit different to the US, which we'll touch on in a moment. So it's decentralized. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that there's a number of kind of notified bodies who perform the assessments. They're independent of the UDAMED and so on, right? So, but they all need the same thing effectively. They all need you to perform the clinical evaluation, have the clinical evaluation plan, provide the clinical evaluation report, and make sure that's sufficient for your device. Okay, and that's all around pre-market for the EU. Thanks, Michael. And just a quick note on the US too. So the US obviously has a different model, where it's more centralized, and the FDA are involved directly, and there's different processes here. Of course, the de novo process for novel devices, or a 510(k) process too for equivalence devices. So the FDA really oversee the entire process in the US, and it's a bit different in that it's not decentralized, it's centralized, and it's focused on pre-market approval. And look, there's a lot of comparatives you can take. There's a lot of, if you're doing this right, I'd say if you're doing this for the EU as a primary market, it's very easy to tilt the evidence you'll have there and submit it to the FDA in the US, depending on the device type, depending on the classification. Similarly, the US is requiring obviously similar things. So, as long as you're doing, my advice really is just as long as you're doing a clinical evaluation plan properly, as long as it's rigorous enough, as long as you're reporting out and validating the data that comes out the other side of that, then you're going to be in good shape for any market really. The only nuance I would want to point out is, as I've said, in the EU, the EU AI Act is really key to look at, and it has a decentralized model, whereas the US is more of a centralized model of approval with very specific timeframes and so on as well now. So yeah, so quick few lessons from our own work. Just wanted to point out, so we've probably covered them all already, but just to give a bit of a recap. Data quality and integrity are absolutely key for getting this right. It's important you plan effectively. You cover the things off we mentioned before. You make sure they're all in your clinical evaluation plan. Make sure that the data you get back, make sure you've analyzed that, whether it's from studies or elsewhere, to make sure it appears valid, to make sure it does support the actual objectives and the intended use of your product. That's really, really key. So we've seen a lot of kind of, when we help innovators, it can be from the start, or it can be partway through the process, or commonly it's actually when an audit submission has failed and the innovator wants some assistance and guidance on how to remediate that to make sure they can get their product to market. So this usually always boils down to the quality of the data, the planning that went into the study, and unfortunately it can mean some studies need to be repeated or need to be reevaluated, which is a very costly thing. So as I said, it's always, top tip is always start early. Always make sure you've got a clinical evaluation plan from the outset, and you're working with that in a good way. Post-market clinical follow-up, don't miss this out. It's really, really important, and the rules in the UK have certainly just changed around this to give it a bit more credence and priority. But certainly, PMCF is really critical that you have a plan around that in order to see what you're going to do around that. Otherwise, you'll fail an audit, in my experience. And in the EU as well, just to point out, you do also need a supplementary clinical development plan, which is a strategy around device development, taking into account the studies you've done previously to bring it to market, and what you're going to do following following you being on market to continually prove the safety and efficacy of the device. That's the one to point out from the EU regulations too.
The CDP is essentially what I was discussing. It's a really good point, Michael, because the CDP actually outlines, where you're taking the solution and actually, could there be additional risks down the line, or could you be jumping to another class in the future? So they take a really proactive approach in that. But I would suggest taking a proactive approach in it, regardless of which geographies you're going for, just because it is good governance, but also is going to save you a lot of time and energy when it comes to taking those changes from a product evolution perspective. The other thing to note is that whilst we're here to specifically talk about clinical evaluation, which is demonstrating clinical safety, this is just one of essentially three parts of the overall conformity statement that you would submit to the regulator. The other is the technical file, which demonstrates technical safety, and then your quality management system, your ISO 13485 system, which demonstrates operational safety. So this is just one of three elements to your overall safety and compliance evidencing, but just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Michael. So obviously the clinical evaluation plan, obviously big cornerstone of the actual submission for the conformity assessment, as Michael said there. Yeah, you've got to get those other things right too. They're equally as important, really, in the three key things that I looked at in an audit situation. So yeah, I mean, in conclusion, we've been over the key points, I think, a number of times, but obviously CEP, plan it well, do it from the start. Don't leave it till later. Think about right up front when you're going to bring your device to market. Think about what your target territories are. What you're going to need to do to really prove specifically if it's AI. You need to be thinking about things like EU AI Act, ISO 42000, or make sure that all goes in your thinking when you're developing a clinical evaluation plan and when you're thinking about how you're going to actually prove that the device is safe and it provides the efficacy you require as well. That's the key thing for me, really. Yeah, so I think we've been over it all. Plan well, make sure the evidence is robust, validate the evidence yourself. Get someone that's done this before to look over that evidence, that's been through this audit process many times, so they can give you the benefit of their experience. Because what you need as an innovator, I guess, to get to market, particularly if you're funded, it's really important that you hit your targets and get to market. So I think by doing this right, by planning effectively, by validating, by getting input from regulatory experts who've done this many times, that's all going to help you and support you as you look to go to market.
So that's it from a presentation perspective. These are my details. I can share Michael's details as well. We are always open to offering up help, especially to innovators and clinical entrepreneurs. This is what we do. Obviously, I come at it from a product and development perspective. Michael Bell comes at this from a regulatory advisory perspective, and there is a third tier to that sort of consortium, Avengers Assembles. We work very closely with an organization called Orca that do a lot of the compliance assessments as well. They're not an auditor like BSI and BAB, but they are a great organization for helping you to evidence meeting those standards. I'm conscious of time. I do have some case studies, but there's a really interesting project that we did with guys in St Thomas's, big NHS trust in central London. We effectively built an AI referral management solution that took referral letters and assessed risk. This is the prime example of where we started out as not a medical device, and then it's kind of creeping its way up all of the various classes. So I can share more details about that offline if you're interested. The other one is around successful partnerships, and there are lots of really successful partnerships around AI being worked on in collaboration with NHS hospitals, big public sector organizations as well. So I would think very carefully about what you're willing to share in terms of the way that you're building out your evidence and your safety. Universities are great organizations to work with because chances are they are experts in being able to evidence research and solve hypotheses, but also lots of researchers probably have several years of experience in gathering this evidence from a desk review perspective, perhaps from a lab environment, and then you as the innovator can bring that into the real world as well. So do dive into your local academics and see whether there's any value there that you can really kind of help them bring to the real world, as we call it, and bring that to market to be able to solve some big problems. And I think that's everything for now. Oh, yeah, and this is Orca. A little shout out to them. They do a lot of work around other parts of the world as well. So whilst we're only here to talk about the UK, EU, and US, there are slightly nuanced standards as well, and they've got a really nice sort of feel for all of the various standards across more specific parts of Europe and further afield as well. So do give them a check out. But that leaves us about 15 minutes for questions. So I hope you enjoyed that. Please do ask questions either now or offline, and we'll collate them and come back to you.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining this session, and it was quite informative for me to join the previous session as well. So I'm Dr. Tahmina Zabin. I'm a senior lecturer in AI at Brunel University of London. So I'm a co-founder of the RADIANT-CERSI. So I lead a research team at Brunel that develops and collect, let's say, accessible materials, examples, use cases for innovators for AI for medical devices. So the previous session covered software as medical device. So this bit would be specific to AI for medical devices. And there are frameworks and guidelines that are available. And we combined some of the useful guidelines for you today. So I'll cover Spirit AI, which is if you're at a protocol stage, there are guidelines for it included in Spirit AI. And if you have, let's say, designed a product, you need to report it for regulatory approval purposes. So there is a Consort AI framework that you can use to report it right. So in today's agenda, you will see I'll cover why Spirit AI and Consort AI matter. There is a checklist for the design stage using Spirit AI. I will try to break it down, the elements in that checklist with examples. There is a mini quiz that you can access to try your knowledge after I have gone through the checklist. And for reporting purposes, I'll move on to Consort AI with case examples again. So Michael was talking about, let's say, a diabetic retinopathy tool that he's developing with one of the universities. So I do have an example of a diabetic retinopathy tool and how they reported their tool. And IDX-DR tool is one of the first approved, FDA-approved AI tools. So it's a quite good case study to look at how they reported it. And then I'll open the session for final takeaways and question answers. So housekeeping, I saw there is a note on the chats already. So I do have an initial poll. So if you guys would like to fill that out, I think most of you have your names and company name already on your Zoom names. But if you want to fill in the form, it's not mandatory, but if you want to fill in that form, that would be useful. And there would be a short knowledge check, and the session will last for about 40 minutes. And I will try to take questions as they come, if you have them. And I may need Katya's help to read them out loud for me whenever those are there. Okay. So you heard about Michael Bell and Michael Watt about various aspects of clinical evaluation. There are medical devices, could be software as medical device, and AI as medical device would need some special framework than the existing ones. And clinical evaluation is essential for regulatory approval, and traditional trial design and reporting platforms that we have available sometimes miss critical AI specific factors. So as AI solutions are coming in, when they are reporting, we identified that very few mention what algorithm version they used. Is there any data management plan, whether there are under-reporting of those data management, and if there is a solution that is built, how human would interact with the AI is sometimes poorly described. Because the current frameworks of reporting clinical trials was missing AI-specific aspects to ensure that regulators now expect reproducibility, transparency, and bias control if AI is included in your solution. The Spirit AI and Consort AI was developed to fill in any of the gaps that are available in previous Spirit and Consort version for medical devices. So they were developed in 2020 through an international consensus coordinated by the Equator Network. And they published the guidelines or the frameworks on if you have an AI solution, how you should report it or how the clinical trial should be designed. So there was the previous Spirit 2013 protocol guidelines available. So in 2020, they released Spirit AI extension of the Spirit platform. And there was Consort 2010 reporting guidelines previously available for clinical guidelines. So AI-specific extensions were added in Consort AI extension. After 2020, they updated the checklist to make it more, let's say, comply to the real-world needs of today's day and world. So there is a website for consortspirit.org, which is quite useful in the sense that they have collated a number of examples. These checklists usually address any AI-specific risks, such as versioning, human-AI interaction, and transparency requirements that you need to comply to be able to submit for the regulatory approval. So I mentioned the Equator Network. So if you go to the equatornetwork.org, you would see that they are a global platform developed by, let's say, international group of researchers, regulators for health research. They do provide internationally coordinated approach to reporting guidelines. So if you have randomized trial, you would see Consort is the normal framework, and the AI-based extensions will be available on the extended version of it. If I can quickly find a pen, probably. And a Spirit and Consort, as I say, they are quite well managed. You would see that there is a checklist available. And Consort has checklist, expanded checklist, a number of flow diagrams that you can follow for your randomized controlled trial. There are explanation and elaboration also available on the website. So there are core differences between Spirit and Consort. In Spirit AI is, again, I said, for protocol stage, that this checklist helps you ensure that you have designed your product right. And Consort AI is once the product is designed, you reported it right. So the purpose of Spirit AI is to guide you the design and how to write clinical trial protocols for AI-based intervention. For Consort, you would be dealing with writing the report, how to report clinical trial results that involved any sort of AI-based intervention. And obviously, when to use them if you are actually preparing regulatory submissions and clinical trial protocols that are involving AI, you would like to comply to the checklist that is available on Spirit AI. And when you're writing clinical trial papers, preparing for regulatory reports, or a trial is already done, you're sharing the trial results, then Consort AI has a checklist that you can use to check whether you have reported all the things that would help you in the submission process. So on this slide, I do have Spirit AI 2020 checklist because the 2025 version just came out probably 2 months ago. I'm still using the 2020 checklist just because there are some publications that used it. So you can go back and refer to what other people that developed an AI as a medical device, how they reported it. And you can map it to 2025 checklists, which is slightly more extended than the 2020 version. And they are mappable. So I have a list here. So if you look into some of the criterias, let's say, if I look into Spirit AI item checklist, participant and data criteria. So let's say you trained an AI model and the data that you are using, you may be including some data to your model can process some quality of data, and you may have to exclude some of the data just because of poor data quality. So Spirit AI checklist suggests when you are writing your protocol that this is the way my input data would be handled. So one of the examples that you can use in this case, let's say if you're using an imaging AI solution, so let's say there is a diabetic retinopathy is going through an AI system, AI is producing a report, and in case the image that is captured is blurred some way, the AI is either misclassifying the patient or producing a specific result that's misrepresented. Or let's say nowadays there is a lot of AI scribing tools that are in place. If there is noisy audio, or let's say the quality of the audio is poor, you need to mention, according to Spirit AI checklist, that any sort of problematic input, how they would be handled, whether you would include it, or at what situation you need to exclude it. Point number 22, it tells the innovators of the AI as medical devices that if you're conducting a trial, when you're writing your protocol, you need to mention what version that you are using for the trial stage, whether there would be an update during the trial, and most of the time an update of the model is not allowed within the trial to keep it consistent or reproducible. In Spirit 2025, there are some key changes. So there are some new items that has been introduced about data sharing. There is patient public involvement, which is a mandatory requirement on clinical trials nowadays. I think Michael Bell was mentioning about an auditing process for AI solutions. Currently, that auditing process is being replaced by trial monitoring. There are a few other items that has been added, and I have provided a link at the bottom of the slide where you have a full list for the Spirit 2025 trial sessions. There are some merging that has also happened, but as I say, the spiritconsort.org website has a detailed elaboration on each item and what is expected when you're writing your protocol for a clinical trial. What are the elements you should include if you're using developing an AI as a medical device? So I do have an example for an AI scribing system where I would try to map how a specific company that developed an AI scribing system and how they reported it, or how their protocols were developed. So let's say if the study title is randomized trial of AI-based scribing, they're using natural language processing technique for outpatient documentation. So the intended purpose of the solution is to assess the accuracy and safety of the AI scribing in clinical consultations. So in the clinical workflow, there would be a real-time audio transcription. There would be draft clinical notes generation, and that data cannot go as it is to wherever you're saving it. There should be a clinician review, correction, or approval of the note that has been automatically generated. So if we map it to some of the items that I had in one of the previous slides, so Spirit AI item requirement-wise, that I have taken, so I have a group of researchers that is currently building use cases for RADIANT-CERSI, which would be available to any of the innovators that are participating in RADIANT-CERSI as examples to look at later. So this study was the title, item 1, needs you to list the title and abstract of your protocol. And you need to specify the model type intended use for this specific item. So currently, for the example that I am using, it is saying that the intended use is the system transcribes and summarizes clinical consultations for EHR documentation. And you need to discuss how it would be integrated in the clinical workflow and who would be the users. Currently, we are saying that these notes would be using during consultations. A clinician will review, correct, and approve before final submission. And you need to cite any existing evidence of the solution that you're reporting currently. So let's say the paper that we took this example from, they say that they have a pre-trial validation on 5,000 consultations. And they reported that 85% of the note was accurate and 92% of the medical term recognition was seen compared to human subscribes. So you need to report anything that has been in plans for, according to the Spirit AI checklist. If you report the right elements in the right way, when you're asking for approval for regulation and so on, you will have the right set of things listed and documented so that it gets approved. We are talking about a data quality. So for an AI scribe app, currently, let's say this specific developers reported that the AI would not process an audio if there is a background noise, which is more than 60 decibel, or if a recording was incomplete, that data would not be processed by that AI. So you're ensuring the inclusion, you have a fixed inclusion and exclusion criteria that anyone else can reproducibly use. There are items on AI versioning, training, data logging, and performance monitoring. So for this specific scribing trial, this developers reported that they are using version number 4.1, and they locked that version for pre-trial. And they reported that they are not going to update or retrain during trial, and they are using a cloud-based deployment for a secure API access. And in any AI solutions, I think Michael was mentioning in the previous sessions as well, that algorithms are as good as the data it has seen. So in case, because of an accent or because of the audio quality or so on, or because of somebody's ethnicity, the transcription quality is not as good for one group. In that case, you need to do an assessment of those. So because Spirit AI is the design stage, when you're designing your protocol, you need a plan for monitoring any AI-specific harms or any sort of adverse performance. Michael was using an example of, let's say, skin cancer AI solution that do not work with, let's say, dark-skinned individuals just because the training data did not see enough examples of those. In that case, you need to have a plan for, let's say, bias mitigation and those sort of things. There are other system requirements, pre-trial evidence and update policy. So let's say if somebody reported a specific solution for AI scribing, you also need to give other users an indication of, let's say, if that AI solution is being adopted in another place, what sort of hardware on-site or off-site requirement would be needed for that AI to be integrated in a different setting. So this example was say that the system would require some live audio capture. It would need secure cloud resources for processing, and there should be some encryption applied at the local storage, and the solution may also need direct EHR, electronic health record system integration. And versioning and update policy is again similar to what we saw on the initial list. So most of the time, no updates or model training is permitted during the trial, and post-trial performance drift analysis should be planned during the design stage to evaluate the need for model adaptation after that initial design stage. So if you guys are available and if you have access to a computing device, I do have a short quiz that you can go to. The QR code is here. I probably have sent a link to Katya. So if you do not have a QR code scanner at the moment, Katya, if you could share the office form links over there, I could fill in some of number of small quiz questions. But if not, no problem. I do have the questions on my screen. One of the points Michael was discussing that sometimes if you have a product already, benchmarking it to existing products is one of the very first stages to see what sort of things they have reported when they reported about their specific development. So because our team is building some case studies, it is based on a published literature. So there is a paper on accuracy and safety of AI-enabled scribe technology. If you go to the forms link, then this link would be accessible to you. You can click on it and have a look. But in the specific report, they reported that AI scribing study, they audited 44 transcriptions and found 127 errors and mean 2.9 errors per note, with omissions being the most frequent. So let's say somebody said something, but when AI scribed it, it missed out some words. Probably 3 words per note was missing. So according to the publication, what do you think, which Spirit AI item this reporting is relating to? Is it talking about input data criteria, or this report is actually talking about login, input, output, or overrides, so inclusion and exclusion criteria? Or is it monitoring AI specific harms or adverse performance? You can either answer on the chats, or you could fill in the Microsoft form, which I could quite quickly have a look. Any answers, Katya?
Nothing in the chat yet. I'm still trying to figure out what my answer would be.
Okay. Okay, so this specific criteria, this specific portion of the report is actually discussing about monitoring AI specific harms or adverse performance. So by adverse performance, we are talking about any error that AI currently have, or any misclassification, misreporting this system currently have. According to Spirit AI checklist, that is item number 19. So the reports for this specific publication from this specific set of innovators, they are complying with one of the items that is item number 19 in the list. So monitoring any sort of transcription error in the scribe study is quite critical for clinical safety, because it helps you identify any sort of omissions that could lead to misdiagnosis. So let's say somebody, when they were talking about a symptom, so let's say they said, I'm feeling unhappy about a skin condition and so on. So let's say if unhappy is recorded as happy, it could lead to misdiagnosis. So reporting any sort of error is very important if you have AI as a medical device in place. Okay. So there is another question that I have on my screen. I think it's item number 3 in the Microsoft forms. In the same report, they said that, okay, participants included simulated doctors and patients using preset scripts across specialties. Which Spirit AI's principle is missing in this protocol? So they said that they tested the AI scribing, and the system was tested using simulated doctors and patients and using preset scripts across specialties. And currently, the way they reported it, it doesn't tell you that if someone else wants to replicate a similar sort of transcription testing using human participants, what they would need. So currently this specific answer is missing hardware and software requirements when they discussed about the setting. So for the testing point of view, safety testing point of view, you definitely need to have on-site or off-site infrastructure requirement included to the system. Okay, so in the protocol design, you need to tell your hardware and software requirement if someone else wants to deploy a similar sort of solution. Okay, second example is an oncology randomized control trial protocol. using AI for imaging interpretation. I quickly went to the chats. Somebody probably had a question on it. I'll come back to it later, but you may see some of the things that could be useful for you in this study. So this is a lung tumor segmentation solution that someone built, and the model that they are using is a deep convolutional neural network. And the purpose of the solution is to evaluate the accuracy, safety, and workflow integration of an AI imaging tool for assisting lung tumor detection in CT scans. So in the clinical workflow, radiologists would receive an AI-generated tumor segmentation overlay, and where on the lung the AI thinks the tumor is. The radiologist can accept, adjust, override AI outputs, and the final diagnostic decision would remain with the clinician. Currently, the integration process in the intended use and the expected flow is like this. So I took this example. Again, you can see a reference link at the bottom. So there is a systematic review of any sort of imaging tool used in the clinical settings are reviewed by a group of authors, and they identified some of the things that are reported by the developers of such solutions. And if we map it to the Spirit AI items and when they published their results, how they reported it and what elements were met or was not met, you could have a quick look and do the mapping exercise. So as part of the RADIANT-CERSI, we would be publishing a number of use cases for you to have a look on what would be the way of reporting it truthfully, reproducibly, and transparently. So in this current scenario, let's say title abstracts are kind of similar, but you need to mention what sort of algorithms that is in use for this specific AI product. So they mentioned about deep convolutional neural network for lung tumor segmentation. And the intended purpose of it is to assist the radiologist, and you need to, according to item number 6A, you should report the intended role in the clinical workflow. Currently, we talked about it in the previous slide. It would generate tumor segmentation overlay. You can adjust, accept, or reject AI outputs before final diagnosis. So the clinician is the final decision maker in the pipeline. You also need to cite existing evidence on AI's performance. So currently they are reporting they tried out 1,200 CT scans and they identified that 88% of the time AI is producing a correct segmentation of the affected tumor region. And they compared it to expert annotators or radiologists who does it manually. So the performance is somewhat compared and they reported the accuracy. There is a detail on site-off-site requirements. So currently they say that it would require a workstation integration with PACS and any and GPU-enabled servers. Would be good if the rapid processing is required and so on. So in the next slide, I do have the full map, which you could have a look. I'll share the slides with you so you could have a full look if it is a case study of interest for you, and have a checklist of, let's say, if you're preparing technical files for your regulatory submissions, the Spirit AI checklist gives you some points to go back to, whether I've reported this, do I need more evidence to produce evidence for a specific section, and so on. Okay. So in the MCQ list, the knowledge check form, you could fill it in your own time. There is probably a few other questions that you can go through. But again, as I said, it's not an extensive list. There could be different use cases depending on what you are building your solution on. And in case you want the team of researchers that are available at RADIANT-CERSI to build you some useful tool for specific use case, please do reach out to us. So we do have researchers employed in the team who could look specific ideal answers for various items for specific use cases as well. Okay, so now let's move on to Consort AI. So let's say you developed a product and you have conducted your clinical trial, and you need to report your trial results now. So Consort AI focuses on transparent reporting of clinical trial results. And Consort AI is the extended version of Consort 2010 itself for clinical trials with, I think, 30 more different items on it. And one of the main things that Consort AI suggests the innovators to do is to do subgroup analysis across ethnicities, age group. I think Michael was again mentioning the AI skin lesion classifier. So one of the recently published report in 2024, they reported their subgroup biases like this. So a well-known skin cancer detection algorithm, so the reference is at the bottom, performed well overall, but showed 15% drop in accuracy when applied to darker skin tones. And the original data set, they also discussed about why that specific solution failed for a specific group, because the original data set lacked diversity, and which was not apparent until the performance was retested and on more representative skin types and so on. So Consort AI has a checklist that helps you identify all the necessary elements a regulator may be expecting from you when you're reporting the results of your clinical trial. So the full list is kind of available here. I tried to group the 30 items into main themes. So there are items on trial identification and transparency. There are items on trial registration, whether you have registered your specific trial already, you need to report that trial number. Your protocol and statistical plan, AI system versioning, access to analysis plan, those sort of things are being covered under item 3. And the full checklist is available with elaboration. You can find them on the consortspirit.org website. In terms of result and outcome reporting, you need to report participant flow, recruitment and follow-up intervention adherence, intervention delivery, how the system was developed, and so on. There are trial design and there are elements next to trial design and implementation as well. You would see that whether the trial design was parallel, adaptive, or those were AI appropriate designs. So some of the items that you used in using Spirit AI, you would see those items are also available in the Consort AI list. So whatever you followed during the design stage, that would be useful in your reporting stage as well. And you definitely need to discuss on the study limitations, any sort of interpretation on AI specific performance, equity risk. Again, Michael was talking about health inequality caused by AI system if they are not performing well on an underrepresented group. You definitely need to report if your solution that is using AI on the back end, whether those sort of risks are available. And I think our team of researchers are also developing some workshop for risk assessment specific to AI solutions. So there would be a workshop coming up sometimes in September on how to do the risk assessment and what sort of mitigation strategy that you can have in place so that you can truthfully report that your product performs this way. You'll mention any sort of limitations that the product currently has and what sort of mitigation strategy you can have in place for it to get approved. So item 30 talks about any sort of AI bias, model drift, or any problems with generalizability with the solution. Okay, so if you go to the Consort 2025 documentation, you would see they have a flow diagram. So if you do systematic literature review for evidence synthesis, it's a similar sort of diagram for identifying who is included in your clinical trial, how they were dealt, excluded at different stages. So this diagram presents the updated Consort 2025 flow work. And it starts with enrollment, who was enrolled through allocation and follow-up. And once that specific data is collected, it could be that some of the data did not made to the analysis stage. So you would see that why something was not included or why something was excluded with their reason for something going wrong. So it's a concise way of reporting. And if you go to the Consort 2025's flow diagram, there are elaboration on ideal ways of reporting any of the safety testing that you have conducted during the clinical trial. So having the report as transparent and as honest is quite important. So you report what you did. You also at the same time have to report any sort of limitation of the system to make sure there are things in place to cope with the problems or misdiagnosis the solution has, and there could be post-hoc things that you can have in place to make the system more safe, or you should have a second plan B for the error cases that the AI solution currently have. So for Consort AI, I do have two examples. One is a well-documented AI example. The solution was developed in 2018, so the diabetes retinopathy solution by IDXDR, and it's the very first AI device that was approved in the US. My reason for using the example is if you look into the list, or checklist that is provided in Consort AI, though the report was published in 2018, in their report, you could still match all the items that are required in Consort AI. So I have given you a map of, let's say, the link to the publication is available here. So they have a pivotal trial on an autonomous AI-based diagnostic system for the detection of diabetic retinopathy in primary care offices. And whatever they reported in the publication, if you identify the items and what their responses would be for various items, you could have similar sort of responses for your solutions. And looking into evidences from literature could help you in that way, that you could look into how other people reported it, match it with the checklist to get an ideal response or an example response for your use cases some of the times. So let's say the report mentioned that the reports were, they had a registration number for their clinical trial. They say that whatever they are using for statistical analysis, they say that that will be publicly accessible via the registry and the sponsor's website. They talked about their version being locked before trial initiation, and they did not change the version of the model at all while the entire trial conducted. The way of data handling they talked about, they de-identified the trial data, and whatever statistical code has been applied for analysis, that would be made available upon reasonable request post-publication. Point 5 was about, if we go back quickly, the point 5 was about funding and conflicts. So they did mention about who funded their research and whoever was involved in the AI system development and trial sponsorship. They provided all the materials necessary for scientific justification and objective. So you need to report about what would be the primary objective of the tool that you're developing. So they did, primary objective was to assess the diagnostic accuracy of the tool versus a standard ophthalmologist who is a human rater. So they're, for this clinical trial, they are comparing the performance of the tool with a human screener. The secondary set of objective this clinical trial had is to assess the subgroup performance across age, gender, and ethnicity. So you could have ideal responses extracted from previously published solutions, and you could plan what are the things you as innovator would need to fill in one of the item points, and what would be your responses. And the checklist is a quite, let's say, summarized guideline that these are the things the regulator is expecting you to include when you're reporting about your clinical trial. So the second case is coming from Babylon AI symptom checker. Again, the example is from the US. I did not find a good UK-based example. So they submitted for an FDA clearance, but this AI trial was not cleared by FDA. And the things that you're seeing on the slide are extracted from, again, a publication from 2021, where they identified the lessons they learned from that failed approval. So they reported about the clinical context of the tool. So this was an AI chatbot for symptom assessment and triage support, and it was not FDA cleared. It was implemented in the healthcare settings without formal clinical trial approval. Because it was not cleared, they got feedback on trial design was unclear, and the study methodology was not clear at all. So if you're following Spirit AI checklist, you could ensure that your trial design has all the expected elements by either MHRA, FDA, or UKCA, depending on where you're applying things for. So you can go back to the checklist to identify what are the things that the approving body is looking in your submission. And algorithm versioning for this Babylon AI symptom checker, because they did not have a record of model version during evaluations. That was one of the pitfalls they had for not being approved. They did not mention the interaction pathway. So there are a number of things that they did wrong, which led to FDA not clearing their trial for further processing and so on. So again, literature is a good source to check back like what worked for some groups and what did not work for a specific solution. Okay, so I'm kind of to an end. So the takeaway for innovators is RADIANT-CERSI is trying to build up a network of resources, platform for contents that would be useful for you. And because Brunel is an academic partner, you could ask our researchers to dig out things that would be useful for you for your cases. So with Spirit AI and Consort AI, you can integrate the checklist that you have available from the website. And because it is developed by an international consortium, they have developed the checklist to meet most of the regulatory criteria from US, UK, and so on. So the checklist, you would see that some of the checklist items would match to the MHRA's evidence requirement as well. So you can use the checklist to structure your protocol and reporting. And MHRA also, I think, invites application for their AI log. So if you're kind of at a final stage of your development, you could engage with AI log sandbox that is run by the MHRA. And it's one of the ways, if your submission is approved, they probably recruit 8 to 10 companies to validate your approach in a regulatory safe environment, and you can get some direct MHRA feedback if your engagement with AI log is successful. And you can prepare your EKCA approval via clinical evidence. So use your Spirit AI informed trial protocols to design the clinical investigations to meet the MHRA's and EKCA's data and evidence requirement. Okay. So things that I have as links at the bottom of various slides. So you would have them as the final slide of today's talk. So I'll share the slides with you. I think are we sharing them on the?
If you're happy to,
Oh, so
that'd be fabulous.
okay. I
Yeah.
think the recording would be shared, and I can share the slides as well. No
Amazing.
problem, I think.
Thanks,
Okay.
Tamina.
So there is a professor of statistics that built the equator network. He had kind of a quite famous quote on any sort of development in medical domain. He said that readers should not have to infer what was probably done. They should be told explicitly. So Spirit and Consort AI are ways of having that checklist and you explicitly mentioning everything that the regulator is expecting you to report about. Okay, I think that's it from me.